Welcome to Resilient. I'm Lori Lorenzo, Deloitte's Research and Insights Director for our Chief Legal Officer program, and co-host of the Chief Legal Officer track of this podcast series. About a year ago, I hosted my first podcast, and I have to say, I'm hooked. It's definitely one of my favorite roles at Deloitte. I've had the pleasure of talking with some incredibly dynamic legal leaders and hearing some amazing stories. Reflecting back, there are a few common threads. There's a strong sense of purpose, a call to serve, natural curiosity, the ability to listen and advise wisely. The trend continues with today's guest, Vanessa Allen Sutherland, EVP, Government Relations and Chief Legal Officer at Norfolk Southern Corporation. She's built her brand as a fixer and a trailblazer in many sectors. She talks about her journey in legal roles in emerging industries and her pivot to public service, and she shares how she's used the experiences, exposures, and opportunities presented in each to propel her career and help her understand what it means to be a strong leader. Let's hear what Vanessa has to say. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm really excited to have you as my guest today.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. This is a lot of fun. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about.
Me too. So for our listeners, Vanessa and I go a little ways back. She and I originally met while we were interacting with the Leadership Council on Legal Diversity. Vanessa was one of our fellows at the time, and since then has had just a fantastic and tremendous career. So we're going to talk over the course of this podcast about that career, some of her early influences, her decision-making processes as she thought about different choices to make. And I'm super excited about the story. I hope that our listeners will enjoy it too. Vanessa, why don't we start with maybe the early days? So tell me a little bit about what it was like growing up and how you came to think that being a lawyer was the right choice for you.
Well, the irony is I was going to be a vet initially and then a physicist. So I'm not sure, Lori, that originally law or being a lawyer was on my radar. I'm the youngest of four. My brother's an engineer. He has a computer engineering undergrad and electrical engineering master's. My sister's kind of a math and science gal as well. She's a doctor. She's double boarded. And the other sister was kind of more in my speed, like, oh, we'll see what there is to take advantage of in the world. She majored in French. But growing up, watching them at 8, 10, and 15 years, my senior, I think I've said this to a lot of people, it has been extremely formative for me. My parents were very pro-education, my mother in particular, but there's nothing like saying, oh, wait, I can keep up with them, and striving constantly to try to keep up with people who are that much ahead of you. And so that early day of I could do anything and be anything was just modeled for me at home. So I don't think I had a pinpoint of I want to be this or I can only be this. I grew up with the philosophy of if I work hard, I can really be anything. And if I'm not crazy about that, I have the capacity and time to pivot. And that level of freedom and autonomy and motivation, I think, has put me on a pretty good course for my life. But I think the other formative early years was really feeling the excitement of keeping up with them. I did skip a couple of grades. And so when I got out of high school at 16, I really felt very confident, like I want to explore things. I want to go out there and see what the big deal is about college and work and life. So that level of always wanting to know what they were experiencing, I think drove me to be really more of a risk taker, not risky, but to be more willing to take risks in academia and ultimately my career.
Well, and I think we talked about a sense of adventure, right? So not only were you trying to keep up, you were trying to catch up. You skipped a few grades, you went to college early. And what I'm hearing is you describing this tremendous curiosity. So tell me what it was like coming out of high school and going into the college environment where you were a bit younger than some of your friends. What was that adventure like for you?
Wow. So I'm going to chuckle a little bit, Lori, because 16 and 18 at my age, and everybody else who's listening, is probably not that big of a difference. But when you're actually 16 and everyone else is 18, you're like a little sister or the equivalent of a middle schooler because there's just that age gap is extremely notable when you're in those age brackets. And so the sense of adventure was, wow, I don't have anybody here telling me about bedtime or where to go or what classes to take. I've got to figure this out. But I think I'm comfortable and confident enough to figure it out. And so that sense of adventure was, how do I make friends here? And really start to get a sense of how they're doing it. Maybe it was my early benchmarking. I don't know. I hadn't thought about that just now, but I had my own early benchmarking study. But really also really finding out, what does the school itself have to offer? And having 3 older siblings who had gone to college, I kind of knew that this adventure could take any number of paths. I went in to be a physicist. I really wanted to be an astrophysics major. Einstein, Richard Feynman, Stephen Hawking, those were my people. I fancied myself cooler, and less of a STEM nerd, but really those were my people. And I met people who were doing poli-sci and art history, and that felt like even more of an adventure, something completely different. And that took me to London for what was going to be a London semester. Turned out to be a little bit longer. I studied British art, British politics, lived in London, went to a couple of different continental Europe, French and Belgium experiences, and just loved it and wanted to explore it, and felt like I had the family backing and the know-how to navigate that path. So I just had a ball in college in seeing it as untapped, unknown opportunity and just being open to different experiences.
Vanessa, you've talked about confidence a few times, and we're only at college. Where does that come from? For some teenagers, the years between 15, 16, 18 are not so confident. They're maybe a little more nervous or skeptical or uncertain. But even as you talk about it now, there's a great confidence. And I know there's some of that comes with hindsight. But in that moment, where did that come from? I mean, was it the family? Was it your parents? Is it innate?
I think it's a lot of things. If I had a pie chart, I don't know if I would have percentages, but I really have come to believe we are all born with a little bit of a roadmap and a blueprint, and nature and nurture converge at some point. For me, my family said I was pretty much baked this way, born kind of a little bit of an old soul. I like to observe. People do not believe it, but I am an introvert. Which means I spend a lot of time thinking and processing and really being reflective. And so that's part of my makeup, my personality. But honestly, Lori, great schools and teachers who are encouraging, older siblings, there is some truth to where you are born, the placement of your birth, family and friends, and the level of really trying and failing and really realizing, maybe from a family philosophy, that it's trying that matters, not perfection. And so that having that record play in your mind allows you to take risks, even as a young kid or as a teenager, that others who might be a little bit more afraid of the failure as an end in of itself than I was. I kind of thought, well, if I try it and I don't like it, okay, I can do something else. And that clearly was not an implication that I was going to get, F's and D's or, break something vital. But we just had a mindset of striving towards excellence, and don't whine about it. If you don't get it right the first time, figure out what you didn't get right. And so that confidence, I think, comes from people around you, whomever that might be, family or friends or teachers, helping you understand the importance of resilience. And when you realize you can bounce back, boy, you can ultimately be confident because you're not afraid to try everything because of the what if or the unknowns.
Yeah. So what did you end up majoring in college?
Double poli-sci and art history.
So poli-sci and art history. And then the decision to go to law school, when did that enter in?
Well, I took a year off because I graduated at 20, and I have to confess, not being able to go to senior week because I wasn't 21, not being able to go to any of the end of year activities, even though sponsored by the dean. It was kind of a wake up call that maybe I was young, and being in grad school and the workforce, I was going to have to really think about what that meant to me as a graduating 20-year-old. And so I took a year off to really think about, do I want to go to art history grad school and become sort of maybe a curator or an art historian or a professor, or do I want to do something different, go to business school or law school? And it was my family who said, please go to law school or business school because if your interests change, you will have a flexible, more versatile degree, and you can always do art history as an art and entertainment lawyer. I remember the dinner very vividly. But you are going to want to grow accustomed to a certain lifestyle, and eventually, when you're off the family payroll, you're going to have to figure out how to afford all this stuff. And so, give yourself the most opportunities. So, I worked at the Department of Energy in the Office of Inspector General for a while, 1 year. Applied to law schools, got in and chose American University because it was international and in DC, and loved it. So it was a gap year of sorts, but ultimately decided that law school for me was going to be a continuation of the reading, the writing, the thinking that you do in a program like art history or poli-sci. But it would give me the versatility to really take that career into a lot of different fields if I wanted to over time.
Yeah, our stories are a little bit similar up to this point, Vanessa. I also finished high school a bit early, college a bit early. I was young. Someone told me that it would be a good idea to wait a little bit to go to law school because their reasoning was that the firms might not take me seriously if I came out of law school at 21, 22. And so maybe work a little bit, develop some business savvy, and then go to law school. I think where we were different is that I really didn't know what lawyers did. So it sounds like your family helped you understand that you can merge law with almost any other interest. I only knew litigation, and I probably didn't even know it was called litigation. I just knew lawyers went to court. And still, I found law school really fascinating, and it was exciting. And I thrived on the Socratic method where you had to be prepared and you got called on. What was your experience in law school? Did you like it? Did you find that it was true that you could merge some of your other interests with the more traditional practice?
So this is really kind of in the full confessions, Lori. You're getting my, whatever the equivalent of is my red table talk. I thought that law school was too individualistic. And having come from a program in England, having done art history and poli-sci, where you kind of often work in groups or you're working on a project. I thought that law school was great from just an intellectual and learning perspective, but socially, I didn't like it as much as business school. And I think that's ultimately one of the things that when a professor suggested, he was like, oh, you like tax and you seem to like the numbers. I think you'd be great if you're interested in going into corporations in the business school. And so I applied, got into the business school. And I confess, I loved that more because the people tended to be much more diverse. And I don't mean diverse from a cultural background. I mean diverse in what they wanted to do with themselves. And being forced to be on teams was much more fulfilling to me than the somewhat solitary, individualistic approach that law tends to cultivate. So as between the two, I had a ball in business school and I simply liked law school. The debate and the Socratic method was not my favorite. I really like to hear what other people think. And in business school, it was much more round table, much more brainstorming, camaraderie, making each other better. And in law school, it was really a race of one. How do I make myself better than I was yesterday? And it felt more like a marathon than kind of a relay. that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so when you graduated then, did you have to think a lot about whether you were going to go the route of traditional law practice or into something that was more kind of business focused? How did you merge those feelings into your career path?
I knew early on that I was not going to be any place other than a corporation. And so merging, how do I take the energy, teamwork, product development, and creation that was just endemic in business school and turn that into a legal career? And that's how I ended up being in-house so early. I was just tenacious, like, who will take me with very few law firm years behind me? Where can I go? And that's ultimately how I ended up in a tech and telecom organization, because they had built very large law firm-like practices, much like at that time, the oil and gas industry. And so you're basically in a small law firm, or in some cases, a medium law firm. And so I needed to make that choice to pivot. How can I be fulfilled, be a lawyer, be happy, but be in an environment that is not solitary and issue focused, but is team building and product or service driven, which is where I knew my days would light up. So that's ultimately why I pivoted so quickly into the in-house space. And it obviously has worked out for me, but I wasn't sure at the time how I was going to make that transition. Law is very rigid. You're going to do a clerkship, with a law firm, and then eventually somebody will let you do other things. And I thought, how do I short circuit that?
Yeah,
I'm capable. And so I just worked on figuring that path out.
And I see your sense of adventure, because not only did you move in-house quickly, but you picked kind of this new uncharted territory. So tell me what that was like. When you entered telecom, there was so much unknown. There was so much unregulated. There were so much to do. Tell me what that was like.
Oh, wow. It was cool and frightening all at the same time. As a lawyer, we like to have answers. And people don't remember, but in the early and mid 90s, when we were doing telecom and outsourcing, there was no HIPAA or child protection laws or privacy breach notification, or that just wasn't, it didn't exist. And so there were, the typical Economic Espionage Act and surveillance and wiretapping laws, but we were building it and trying to give legal advice as that space was emerging, as people were just starting to figure out what a website was and what outsourcing meant. So it was really neat to be in rooms with people who were the Steve Jobs, Mark Andreessen, Larry Ellison, Bill Gates minds of that time, who could see where we were going to end up in 2021. But in 95 and 6, it wasn't built. And so that was really exciting to me, to be at the forefront of trying to craft legislative and regulatory proposals, respond, understand what the business even was. And I liked it, but it was a little lonely. There weren't that many women. There weren't that many, certainly diverse women, because it was predominantly a techie, STEM, math and engineering space. So honestly, Lori, was great. It built my fortitude, being the only one in the room and having a different perspective, and sometimes the only different perspective. But boy, what a phenomenal time to be in an industry that needed lawyers to help develop the frameworks under which they operate now. So it was really cool. But there were a couple of days I woke up, I'm like, oh my God, I hope we don't commit malpractice. Like we are like kind of trying to put the wheels on as the car is moving, and that's not safe. So it was fun, but it was definitely not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about emerging areas of the law and the intersection of women or people of color and those practices, because in some ways it's terrifying because nobody knows the right answer. And so it feels like you're out kind of on the ledge alone with no good resources. On the other hand, there's no old guard, if you will. There's no utmost authority you really don't have to listen to anybody in a way. You can make a name for yourself. You can learn and influence in ways that you can't in an area of law that's already well established. So I definitely can see how it was exciting and terrifying at the same time. And I know our listeners can't see your face. I can. You have the biggest smile. And so to me, it seems like you're remembering this quite fondly, notwithstanding how challenging it was.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was the best time ever. And, the true, for me, the true sign of, did you enjoy your job, or are you still friends with the people you worked with? And do you remember the deals, the triumphs, the challenges fondly? And I really do. That was one of the best jobs. I mean, I've had amazing jobs and work environments, but trying to build something out of nothing is really a reward that I can't articulate unless you've been in it, right? Creating something out of nothing.
And so you were in telecom, I think, during the time that industry was not just growing, but there was some turbulence. Is that right? And then you transitioned into another industry that had some turbulence too, right? So this is, again, back to that sense of adventure. Like, I can do this. It's okay that the ground is moving under me. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, so Lori, in fairness, the turbulence in telecom, I did not seek that out. The executives were indicted. That's a completely different set of challenges and tumultuous energy. I went in because it was exciting energy and developmental, and a company bought us and then eventually became known as, at the time, the largest accounting fraud in history. And so it became a tumultuous, unethical environment that really had a lot of great lessons to be learned. NASDAQ hearings, how you monitor and account for financial decisions that the company makes. And that's ultimately what drove Sarbanes-Oxley. And so I did jump out of that fire out of that frying pan, I guess, into another fire, which was the tobacco industry. Another phenomenal job. Love that. But they
Real quick, before we move
because of other factors.
I apologize for cutting you off, but real quick, before we move into that, I just want to stop and talk about ethics, because I think for lawyers, when we take ethics in school or when we're presented with ethics CLEs, sometimes it feels very black and white. This is the right, this is the wrong. And we should just know which way to go. But I think some of the challenges the telecom industry had were much more gray. Deloitte has sometimes invited speakers that were also part of this very tumultuous time in telecom. And one of them was the CFO for one of the companies that didn't fare well. And what he says is, in 1 year, I was winning awards for the way I was structuring financial transactions. By the way, the lawyers signed off on them. And in the next year, they were awarding me my prison uniform and ID number. And in some ways, he's not wrong, right? There was a lot of creativity, ingenuity. Again, this world where the rules were being written as we were flying the plane or driving the car. So as a lawyer, seeing all this, being part of all this, living this experience, how do you navigate these ethical situations where you're friends with these executives? You want to trust them. You have trusted them. And sometimes you're not quite so sure that the decisions are good. Any advice for lawyers who are in these unenviable positions?
Well, I have had many years and instances to reflect on that. It is a really good question, Lori, because particularly when you're in-house and you are shoulder to shoulder with people, it's a little bit different if you're at a law firm. So my legal perspective is really driven towards the people who are in-house and are trying to ultimately help the business itself be successful, of which you are an employee. So your bonuses and your 401k and other things are tied to the success of the company as well. So I can understand how, in hindsight, lawyers want the business to be successful and want them to take risks and want them to chart uncharted territory. I will say, in reflection, there are three things I would say to in-house lawyers. Number one, remember that while they are your friends, your job is to not just keep them out of prison, it is to think about what the shareholders would want to know, need to know. And if you can't answer all the questions about a transaction, why we're doing it, who's going to benefit, where the money is coming from, that's not about friendship or being a good team player. That's about having good common sense and asking hard questions. And so I think SOX and other subsequent regulatory controls really put the burden back on lawyers and finance teams to ask hard questions instead of just saying, okay, well, it's a business decision. That's the second I'll pivot into. Everything is not a business decision. A lot of these decisions now, I think, have evolved into risk management decisions, and lawyers are no longer, I think, able to cloak themselves in, well, that's a legal decision and that's a business decision. When you're in-house, they're really all risk management decisions that converge and sometimes have more of a business foundation or more of a legal foundation. But at the end of the day, you are a risk assessor, and you ultimately have to, if you are unclear about the outcome, which is the norm in business, then you have to make sure you're thinking about what are the mitigants. So if this deal doesn't go well, or if some of the assumptions that we're making are not accurate, how do we pivot? And then the third thing I would say for in-house counsel is you have to know the business as well as your business people. One of the things I've learned from the 90s is that the lawyers really were a last stop on the discussion and the decision tree. And so they were constantly at a disadvantage because you're getting a document and a deal that has to be done by midnight tonight, or we're going to lose $1 million in revenue. And the pressure of reading that contract, but not having any context for months on end about what the deal is and who the supplier or customers are, is something that I think in-house lawyers learn from those instances, because you have to really understand how your company makes money and to whom it sells and from whom it buys. And I think lawyers today are much more sophisticated because of it. I certainly am because of those experiences. But those are some of the things I would caution new in-house lawyers to think about and make sure that they are learning the financial elements of their business before they give legal advice.
Yeah, I would say the other advice I've heard fairly frequently is to make sure you have your own financial house in order, so that in the worst case scenario, and you have to exit earlier than you had anticipated, you're able to do that without worrying about how you feed your family or pay your mortgage. So all really good advice. Now let's talk about out of the frying pan into the fire. And so the tobacco industry. Talk to me about what you were thinking as you moved from telecom into tobacco. To me, there's very little relationship in the two industries, but maybe I'm missing something.
There is not. One is a service industry, the former, and the latter is a manufacturing-based consumer products entity, where you're dealing with individual people versus business clients on the other end. So I went from a B2B service model to a B2C manufacturing model. But I think in-house lawyers appreciate this. I don't think I did until I made the transition and was asked by a headhunter to make the transition. Altria at the time, the tobacco company, Philip Morris, was building out its IT infrastructure, e-discovery, a lot of its technology and other commercial platforms to reach consumers and have a consumer database was in flight. And so in a sense, they saw me coming from what was kind of a startup / very stable, large telecom to be able to move into the commercial practice group and help them with the IT and technology and litigation and e-discovery and records management and all of that work. So I didn't go in really focused on the product elements. So I wasn't supporting sales and marketing. I was taking something that was directly transferable to a department or a group that was developing and was seen as a strategic pillar of the enterprise at the time. So the transition for me was pretty seamless. What I wasn't prepared for was the reaction I was going to get from strangers and people at conferences about working for, having gone from a telecom company where they were still in the middle of their trials, and I had transitioned now to a new entity that is not always embraced. Might I even argue people have very passionate feelings about, that industry. So I think, honestly, Lori, it was more the personal reaction that people gave me about working in the industry rather than the difficulty of transitioning my tech skills from one place to another. Right? Those were very seamless.
And so I want to know more about that, because I feel like maybe on the one hand, there's a pride, right? So we've talked about your confidence, it's these skills you've learned, technology that many lawyers, even today, are not always comfortable with. You are taking that skill, transferring it into an industry that is trying to better leverage technology. And you've had a successful career so far, but you show up at a conference and people are mad at you. Did that impact your confidence in yourself? Did it make you question the choice to go into the tobacco industry?
So the fair part of that is it never made me question going in. I love the people I worked with. I was having a great time every day. And then being in the commercial practice group, we were working on M&A and divestitures, and the work was extremely sophisticated and they were global. It didn't shake my confidence. Like, did I make the right choice of moving to tobacco? I was still squarely supportive of the choice I had made and the work that I was doing and what I was learning. But what it made me mindful of is, however gleeful or ecstatic I might be doing this wonderful work, I think I became more aware of the reputational impact of where you work and for whom you work, rather than on what you work. And I don't think before that job, I had that nuance of, people attaching a team or a jersey to you, like, oh, you work for them, or you are part of they. I don't think I had appreciated that until I moved into an industry that evokes a lot of anxiety and anger from people. So it made me more reflective about how I was going to talk about my decision and my continued decision to work there. I wasn't eager to start to leave. I wasn't, bothered by it. But I thought, how do I educate people about the things that I'm doing there that have nothing to do with, my allegiance or support of one habit over another, but to really kind of help them understand that as long as you're in a company where you're supporting a legal product to people who want it, and you're being more transparent about it, and you're trying to pivot into new spaces, that there's an excitement there too, and you can be part of the story to shift and change that industry, rather than being apologetic about working there. I didn't feel that, and I didn't want it to be inauthentic, that I felt badly about working someplace that was really filled with a lot of smart, talented, really interesting people who were working on a difficult industry at a time where it was having to change its entire model. So I thought that was kind of neat, but I don't think I ever felt apologetic about it.
Well, and I think this is the point in your story where we met, right? You were working for Altria at the point where we met. And I have to agree that the teams of lawyers that I met at Altria were smart. They were ambitious. They were thoughtful. And I think perhaps because they were in an industry that was facing some controversy. And I firmly believe lawyers are tasked with holding or carrying the ethical flag for their enterprise. And they can't do it alone. But I would have to say all the lawyers that I met during that time were intently focused on some of the challenges of the industry and evolving to make things better for their company and their consumers.
The way that you reflect on it, it's very well said. And it made me remember that I think one of the things that made us a good team the people with whom I worked were very centered. Like they didn't take everything personally. And I think when you represent anyone, a person or a company that's controversial, you kind of have to transcend the, desire to feel like, this is about me. It's not about you. And I think you're right. The people there were really grounded in feeling comfortable with the work that they were doing and knowing who they are, but not succumbing to or pushing back or having emotional, responses and backlashes to people, and really being more even keel about totally respecting everybody's opinion. And I think we saw that more in droves in that industry, where the lawyers were a very thoughtful and measured bunch who like to kind of be bridge builders and mediators, rather than feeling overly passionate on one end of the spectrum about the issues. So, yeah.
Well, let's talk about what came next, which might be my favorite part of your story. So one day you're sitting in your office and the phone rings. Tell me who it was on the other side and what the offer was.
It was a really good friend and mentor of mine, Greg Winfrey. And his initial call was, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested in working in a historic presidential administration as a chief counsel, which is the equivalent of a general counsel? And my reaction, because I literally was sitting in my office, Lori, was, no, I don't know anybody off the top of my head. Let me think about it. And he paused and he said, okay, do you know anyone who, and I'm like, why is he saying it so much slower? I heard him a second ago. It took me a minute to understand that he was working at the time at the Department of Transportation. He was already an appointee, and he was looking for a chief counsel actually at the Research and Innovation Technology Administration, which did R&D and tech. And because of my telecom and then Altria experience, he thought that might be a really good fit. And I thought, I don't know, I don't want to move to DC. And when you and I met, I was a fellow, first class of the LCLD Fellows 2011, woo, and was having a great time in corporate America. I liked Richmond. And I was not understanding why Greg called me. And it was several conversations in that he said, look, sometimes you have to go sideways in order to go up. And I think this is going to give you an opportunity to see policy and regulation made from the inside. You've been regulated for many years, but to be in the throes of policy making and legislation, you can't beat this job. And I know it's in DC, but that's perfect. You love DC. You went to school here. And he sort of sold me on it as a mentor. And luckily he knew my personality well enough to know it would be a good fit and to call me to make that pathway available to me. And so by October, he called me in April. And by October, I was telling Altria, I'm going to go to DC and take this appointment thing.
But between April and October, you weren't immediately convinced.
No.
Right? So tell me what that process was like. Tell me what you were not sure about. Who did you reach out to? Kind of walk me through the process that got you to October and giving notice for this opportunity.
So the first calls I usually make when something like this approaches and you're trying to navigate complexity is my little mini personal board of advisors, friends, some of whom are lawyers, some are not, my siblings, my brother in particular, and then other mentors that have either walked that pathway or who are in a similar role or industry. And so it did take me probably 3 months to really understand the vision that Greg had, which was I'm going to be taking a risk by leaving a phenomenal corporate gig. I'm going to take a pay cut. I'm going to go into an work environment with which I am unfamiliar. Yeah, I had worked for a year at Department of Energy, but that's not as an appointee. You're driving policy and administration goals. I wasn't sure about moving the family up to DC at the time. I had a small fry. Was even younger then. She was only 2 at the time, so more portable, but still have to uproot. And I literally had to map out on a piece of paper, Lloyd, and that, for those who make lists, they'll appreciate this, all of the things that I would have to tackle before I could even agree to interview for the job, because I didn't want to start interviewing and then flake out midway through saying, I've thought about it and this isn't going to work for me. So the analysis for me and the great support that I received from friends and mentors, including Robert Gray at the time, was, okay, what are you going to get from this job that you can't get at your job? And irrespective of the pay cut, what skills are you going to acquire? Does it position you to move up and forward? Are you going to be challenged in a new way? Do you think you can actually contribute? Are you going to like the culture? And do you see a job at the end of the day, if this doesn't work out for you on the other side? And when you tick through that analysis and you then ask yourself, if the answer to those questions is, yeah, the culture going to be challenged, I think I can contribute, willing to take a risk, then you have to get to the other critical pieces, which are, what is this going to do with my family? Are they going to be supportive? Is this going to work well with them and their careers, or in the case of my daughter, school and the like? And my family was in Maryland, my parents, so I knew I would have a support system. And I ultimately decided that on the other side of this, I, if nothing else, would be a better corporate lawyer, because I would really understand how the regulations are made and how the policy decisions evolve. And having developed some of the relationships in DC, I had hoped to then translate that back into being more effective, to be able to pick up the phone and ask trade associations, members of congressperson staff about particular legislation and regulations that might affect my company. And I knew I wouldn't get those relationships as authentically outside of being one of them for some period of time. When you're a company calling, there's sort of a rebuff, like, oh, what do you want? But when you have developed an organic relationship with people and you really need to get their opinion, even if you go back in-house, I knew that those relationships would be meaningful. I would learn from them, but they ultimately would help me professionally be able to navigate and be a better advisor as a lawyer. So it took me a long time to go through all of that. That's a lot.
It's a lot. It is a lot. But you got there, and October comes, and you let your team at Altria know that you're going to take the job in DC. You show up in DC, and how does it go? Did you love it?
Oh my goodness. I walked around for about a year and a half telling people, this is the best job ever. I mean, audibly. And I'm not that effusive necessarily, but every day was something new and cool. When people ask you questions like, oh, what's the best thing you remember about your career? I don't know if I have a single best, because just packed into that appointment, Lori, were meeting heads of state, helping. At the time, it was, confidential, helping get the precursors to sarin gas out of a country using Department of Transportation and DOD coordinated efforts, and, being in the situation rooms, learning about the threats that we're facing, oil and gas industries and critical infrastructure that had risks, and who those foreign actors were, and Ebola, trying to figure out how we were going to support transporting Ebola through the United States with the hazmat regs and keeping it quiet, but working with the local police and governors who didn't want it in their state. I mean, you cannot recreate that kind of intrigue and complexity and political lesson in any coursework or classroom in America. And so every day was just really cool, rewriting regulatory frameworks, doing inspections, investigations, speaking at conferences and working with Congress. I have to tell you, it's going to go down when I'm talking to my grandkids as probably one of the best experiences I've ever had, hands down. And yeah, I love the people too. Still friends with a lot of them because they were just smart and passionate and complex and diverse and interesting people.
Yeah, I don't know how it gets better than the Situation Room. I mean, you could just retire there and write the book and live in that. But you didn't do that. You went on to a presidential appointment, right?
I did.
So, did President Obama call you directly? How does that work? I mean, I don't know that I would be able to speak. If any president calls, I think I'd be speechless.
It's surreal. So the process is mysterious, even to those of us who have been appointees. And if you tap any of them on the shoulder, they'll confess that it is somewhat mysterious, right? How did you get my name? How do you know who I am? So there's always that mystery. But the first call was from the PPO, the Office of Presidential Personnel. Hi, we're calling from the PPO, and President Obama is interested in nominating you for blah, blah, blah. But we first have to go through some vetting before that's official. And so the vetting was pretty intensive. You go through FBI check. They talk to everyone I think I've ever met in my entire life, and went to every address that I've ever lived, even internationally. It was pretty intensive. And then you start to get prepped, and then you get the call from the White House vetting team. Come on over to the White House. We think you seem okay. You're ethical, nothing shady in your background. I think the president's ready to nominate you for this Senate confirmed position. They're called PASs, or like the Holy Grail, presidentially nominated, Senate confirmed appointments. And so you go over and you get this form, right? You're like, oh my gosh, this is actually from the president. I'm nominated. Now I've got to go through like a Senate hearing, and I would see those on TV, but I'm going to be one of those people who's getting yelled at. And what happens after that? And then at some point, I guess I'll be appointed and then sworn in. And so a lot of that's just swirling through your head. And when you get that initial phone call before you meet people in person, or you meet the president, or you meet a senator, or you meet any of those people, I literally was just frozen in time with like, is this really happening to me? Holy cow. And I wish whomever put my name forth would like pipe up, because to this day, it's unknown how, my name landed on the desk. But whomever it is, thank you. If I ever figure out who you are, you're getting a Christmas present.
Tell me what this experience was like. And honestly, I really want to know, did you get to have dinner with the president, like hang out? That's what I really want to know.
So it's funny. I went back to some speaking event. I don't know if it was LCLD or Altria, but I brought my photo book. It's, my daughter talking to Michelle Obama and us at a number of different White House events, dinners, parties, receptions for different holidays, me at the State of the Union and at the White House theater. When my grandparents think, did our grandkids turn out all right? And then ultimately, when I'm 80 something and I'm a grandma and I want to impress my grandkids, I'm going to pull that same book out, and it's going to work like a charm, because the pictures, I have one that was on my screenshot. It doesn't matter to me what you think of presidents. I loved Bush. I loved Obama, right? Like, everybody's flawed. You're not going to agree with every policy or procedure and, potential political outcome. But when you get to know them, they're just nice people. And so, for me, some of those experiences are just standing in awe and looking around a room thinking, I am in a room with people that I see on television constantly, who are here for whether it's a fundraiser or something else. You can't, honestly, I don't think, other than showing my photo album, I couldn't recreate the ear-to-ear grin that I had on most of those events. Like, okay, yeah, I just little old me. But it was also a great professional opportunity to build a lot of relationships across political lines and with a lot of different non-lawyers, which has come in handy subsequently. But yes, I have met all of those people. And at the time, at the Attorney General and his successor and cabinet agency heads, those are some of the best photos you could ever have, right? Just
I believe it.
An adult, but with that little kid face, like hi, can I talk to you? Can I shake your hands? I was completely that person.
So exciting. And so for the actual job, right, now that we've gotten the really fun part of the discussion out of the way, it wasn't a purely legal role, right? It wasn't general counsel or counsel. You were chairperson and CEO. So I think merging what you told us earlier, this love for the collaborative nature of business leadership and clearly an exceptional career path in legal, was this kind of a moment of glory where you were experiencing the best of all the things that you loved from an academic and practice perspective? What was it like leading in that role?
It was a convergence of everything you just articulated, because as a lawyer, I still got the time and carved out the space to really dig into what our regulatory requirements were. And so I could always feed that desire to still be a lawyer, right? Because the agency had to run and we had to be compliant. And so there was that element. You didn't need to be a lawyer to be CEO and chair of that board. But at the time, it really helped because when I came in, we had personnel challenges. Congress was evaluating our policies and procedures for compliance. We had an inspector general audit with horrible findings, a backlog of work, low morale scores, a lot of turnover. It was a challenging time. And so it allowed me to be a strategist. We did a strategic plan while I was there in collaboration with my board members and the senior team there. But it was really, for me, a stretch assignment, because when you're no longer the lawyer and you have to make the ultimate decisions and the buck stops with you, Lori, it was a different way of thinking. And it challenged my ability to take all the data, distill it, and instead of making a proposal to somebody, I had to actually make the decision which was the right pathway to take, which could set us in one direction and potentially waste resources, or it could set us up for success for multiple years to come and generate work out of a safety agency that was critical to the chemical industry, work upon which they relied because we weren't a regulator. We were simply doing investigative work that allowed them for free, through arguably the most independent objective source that you could find, develop contributing causal factors and root cause effects of incidents they were having. That saves money, it saves lives, it saves time, it saves people, and it allows their facilities to run and put the capital towards innovation and other things, not remediating an explosion or an oil leak. So I just thought the work was really valuable, and I had to take myself out of the legal realm of coming up with a lot of different alternatives and weighing them forever, and really learning how to build consensus and get people on board and build an environment where there was not a single person or cult of personality that was driving the vision. I had to figure out how to inculcate and build a culture that was agnostic to me, agnostic to the other board members, that could live on after we all left. And that was no small feat. But when you start to tap in and realize, surround yourself with great people, hire good people, listen more than you talk, and think about long-term versus short-term gain and what's easiest, it became a real test case for me, or I'll call it was a master class in taking the legal skills and reasoning and turning that into day-to-day decision-making and strategy and strategic planning.
So, you know what, one theme that I've noticed is I've hosted this podcast, at this point interviewed maybe half a dozen or a few more general counsel or chief legal officers, is perhaps one of the defining elements of strong leadership, and that is the ability to put the work you do in proper context. And I see this in you. I've seen it in other leaders saying, I'm not just doing one thing. I'm not just drafting a contract. I'm not just making a decision. I'm serving in some way. I'm helping in some way. I'm solving a big, important problem. I'm bringing value. And I just want to take a moment and acknowledge that, because the data will tell you that lawyers have been working more than ever since COVID. And as a profession, some data will point to some challenges we have in the profession with well-being and mental health and substance. And I think this focus on what am I contributing, how am I helping, could go a long way to help us and our colleagues feel like the work we're doing has some greater value, some greater mission, some greater purpose. And I don't think you have to be in a government agency or in a nonprofit to frame your work that way. And so I just want to fully pull that out and help our listeners understand that if we just take a moment, we can really put the work we do in context and find the value and the help that our day-to-day contributes.
That is so beautifully said, because people ultimately make you successful or make you fail. And when you don't really embrace servant leadership and recognize that they are part of the solution and execution, they are not to be dictated to and used as a means to an end. The more you spend time genuinely trying to develop people and giving them motivation and passion in the work and the execution, the more they'll execute and the better off you will be, because that's where the innovation comes, right? When they've got freedom and they feel supported and they feel like they are free to think and fail, you get the best work product from people. And that's about being you as a manager, being a servant and being a coach and being a guide to people, not being a dictator.
Yeah, and helping folks align to the mission, reminding people, why we're here.
Yeah.
So, Vanessa, when we talked about the decision to move from in-house legal practice to government, one of the things that we talked about was this notion that sometimes you have to go sideways to move up. And inherent in that is, could I be stalling my career or hurting my career? And you said over the course of the months that you considered this, you thought about, well, what will I gain? How will my career benefit from making this choice? And when you were done with your public service, you did, in fact, successfully transfer back to in-house. Tell us a little bit about that transition. How did you leverage? How did you find value in that? What I think your friend told you was a horizontal move, coming back into the role you have today?
For me, the transition from the role that I was in, the CEO and chairperson role, back in-house in a management, an officer position, was really about me thinking, what management skills, motivation, strategic planning, development, recruitment, retention, all of the things, personnel, is that 75% of what I can do? Because that's going to be 75% of my job. And do I feel like I've done enough? And can I, in an organization that's going to be, 3 times as large, really come in and provide a level of guidance and support? So I thought about that first. But then the other piece of it, because I've been at DOT, I had a good understanding of freight rail. And so it wasn't like going from telecom to tobacco. I actually at least was coming in with a foundational transportation understanding, having been in the Department of Transportation. But that transition was making sure I had the right network of people and friends. I reached out to people who were in similar roles, and certainly inside and outside of my industry, and put them on kind of a roster. Hey, can I check in with you? And as I'm learning, can I talk to you? I went to a lot of and joined relevant trade associations such as Women in Transportation, which was just it's a great organization, WTS, and started to look at where I would be able to shore up the skills from an operational perspective, and then couple that with the management transition. And like I told you, I think once when we were at LCLD, I took Robert Gray's advice of just be honest and vulnerable with people when you're starting a new job or a new role. Here are the things I think I know. Here are the things I don't really know. And here are the things that I can contribute to you today, day one, where I feel very substantively skilled or I feel like an expert. And I'm going to rely on all of you, and then do that. Rely on people and don't micromanage them. Make sure that you spend that time, which is what I did, getting up to speed on the areas that I felt like I don't know that as well as I should. But part of being a leader is just being authentic and honest and letting people know what you don't know, and not feeling like that diminishes your authority, but in fact enhances the ability to learn from others and collaborate with your team.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on authenticity. It's easy to forget sometimes in the corporate environment, and as lawyers, we're expected to know the answer. And the more senior we get, perhaps the more we feel pressure to always know. But I love the advice to not know what you don't know, and to hire a good team around you. I think it multiplies your ability to have a positive impact. Today, you do more than just the CLO role, right? So you sit on a couple boards, and we get questions all the time from the folks we work with that are in-house legal, maybe not quite at GC or CLO yet, but interested in what is it like, on the one hand, to be on the board. On the other hand, what is the relationship supposed to be like between the CLO and the board? So thoughts or insight or advice in either of those two areas?
The former, what is the role that the CLO and the board should have? You've got to have an open and transparent role. If you happen to also be the corporate secretary, I have the Office of Corporate Secretary in my division, and I know that some CLOs actually hold the title CLO and Corporate Secretary. Then you have to have an open and transparent door with the board. They're going to be asking you a lot of things from the day they're onboarded, which is the training that you do for them with others, through all of the meetings, and issues that they're going to have with compensation, understanding the policies, contributing to the PAC, like whatever it is, you have to be available, and you have to be seen as credible and responsive. And you also have to be seen as ethical, because in many ways, you're still the bridge between something going wrong for the company that will land on the board's plate and responsibility to remediate and oversee, and helping your client execute its strategic plan. You're kind of that intermediary. And so I would say for anyone who is currently in the role, they'd probably echo the fact that you've got to really get to know the backgrounds of your board members, their areas of focus, where they're strong. If like me, you also have a committee that you are responsible for, governance and nominating, for example, then you want to be able to help the chairs of those committees, irrespective of which one you're supporting independently, understand what are trends, be a foreshadowing arm for them. What's coming? What are other companies seeing? Make sure that you're always comparative, because you want to know that you're looking externally, and that as an executive team collectively have a pulse on the threats and opportunities that are facing the company. You want to always have that credibility. Sitting on a board is not easier, it's just different, because one of them is a subsidiary board, it's a subsidiary of a public company, and the other one is a public company. Both are very similar in the sense that you have to be immersed enough to understand the operation. So spend a lot of time taking tours and learning the business. I know I said that twice in this chat, but it's really important to know where are your assets, who are your people, where do you have pinch points of supplier problems or not being able to hire. You just have to know what are the things plaguing the company that could hinder our ability to deliver a product or a service. And then you've got to get to know your board members. When you're on the board, those are your compatriots. I'm not going to pick up the phone at those other two companies and start calling directors and executives as a board director, right? You have your CEO and the C-suite. So you've got to really talk to and develop a relationship with your board directors. And I don't think that that's known or a common piece of advice. Yes, it's intuitive, but they are some of the best brainstormers of, I was reading the materials about this company. Did you Did that make sense to you? Do you understand the deal that they're trying to do? Do you understand why they're selling off this business, or inversely, why they're retaining this business? It doesn't seem like it's core to the mission. This is odd, right? And so really taking the 20,000 foot level, which is hard for some lawyers to do, approach to the board is something you have to work on. And what I have heard historically is that's one of the reasons lawyers have had a harder time, a more difficult time getting on boards, is because they have a tendency to be too much into the weeds. Your job is to make sure the lawn is healthy, not each individual blade of grass. And so as a board director, I take a lot of that high level overview and oversight responsibility back to my day job. And honestly, Lori, I think is maybe a better CLO, because I now can interpret what would my board really want or need to know. I'm giving way too much detail. I don't need 52 slides. I need to cut this down to 20. And so they're symbiotic in the sense that you can translate when you need to be down in the details and when you need to be high level to manage risk. And hopefully I'll learn from each of those roles and I can kind of cross-pollinate on a day-to-day basis.
And I think that's what we hear when we talk to folks who are board members with respect to the relationship they want to have with their CLO. It is open and transparent, as you suggest, but also not in the weeds. What do I need to know, and what do I need to know about those things? And then I will trust you to handle it kind of on the day-to-day basis. So thank you for sharing that with us. Vanessa, thank you for sharing all of this with us, from being the youngest of four and early to finish high school and college and transitioning into law school and business school, and this fabulous career full of adventure. And I'm sure not even close to nearing the end of your adventure. I hope not, because I enjoy engaging with you and watching your career and all of the fantastic moves that you've made. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Lori. It was great to talk to you. It's always great to see you and talk to you. But thank you for asking me questions that kind of required me to reflect even more. I try to do that regularly, but this has been great. You've really challenged me to confirm my assumptions about why I'm here and how I got here and where I'm going. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate my time with you too.
Vanessa, you are truly inspirational. Adventure may drive you, but taking calculated risks has definitely been a good way to harness it for good. The vision instilled by your parents to give yourself options, to do the best you can, coupled with the motivation your siblings provided, has certainly sustained a diverse and inspirational career journey. I really enjoyed hearing how you approached each new role. It's a great reminder to us all to invest our energies where we need to build skills and network to help us along the way. And it's so important to find our core strengths and harness those in building our brand. We covered a lot on today's episode, and if you want to know more about the Chief Legal Officer's role and the many perspectives across legal leadership, visit us on Deloitte.com and search Chief Legal Officer. Before I sign off, I have 2 questions for you. First, what did you think? And second, what can we bring you next? Feedback is so important. We'd like to hear from you about topics and leaders of interest. Hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter to share your ideas. For more insights from many iconic and resilient leaders, just go to Deloitte.com/US/resilient. Until next time, stay safe and remain resilient.